Welcome to Buddhism Talks, everybody. This is our 10th episode, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Paul Sherman with me today. Some of you may know in the lay Buddhist organization, SEI, or Soka Gakkai, the focus is on practicing Buddhism in daily life. It's being a Buddha in daily life, which means there has always been a secular focus, a daily life focus, and a spiritual focus. The two have always moved hand in hand together. There's no separation at any point. Now, the SEI has three areas, one could say, of secular activities that they have committed to. Those three areas are peace, culture, and education. All three areas are where humanity can flourish and is a basis for peace. Activities in culture, in education, and general peace promotion are all crucial to creating a healthier, peaceful society. So for today's podcast, I want to focus on the education pillar, specifically Soka education. So we're going to talk about what it is, how it started, how dimensions of it got to Canada, and some of Paul Sherman's work in that area. As much as this is about Soka education, this is also about Paul's personal experience, about bringing the principles of Soka education into Canadian society, and also building a career based on creating this kind of broader value. In the practice of Nichiren Buddhism, there's always been the two parallel streams, in fact. If you think of Nichiren Daishonin, even in his day in the 1200s, he was writing letters of remonstration to the authorities. He was active in society. This is a foundational dimension of our Buddhism. First two presidents were imprisoned for refusing to accept the demands of an authoritarian government during a time of war. And as they all stood up against the forces that would enslave people, also saw a way forward. And part of that way forward has always been education. So to open up this discussion, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Paul Sherman, who is the chair of the Department of Community and Social Services at Guelph Humber. He is recently retired. He remains the director of the Guelph Humber Soka Education Research Center on Global Citizenship. So welcome, Paul, and thank you for joining us today.
It is a pleasure to be on your podcast. I've seen some of your podcasts and they're terrific, and congratulations to you. I'm happy to be here to talk about less about me and more about Soka education.
Thanks. I also want to hear about you, though. So many people struggle with having careers that create value. And I think it's really interesting to hear the moment where you made a particular determination and how that unraveled. So I think your personal experience is just as interesting as the Soka education part. So now I wanted to start with, where did Soka education come from? What was the founding spirit of it? And what is it, in fact? And also in that explanation, why is it so important nowadays? I mean, I personally, I'm sure you agree, feel like the principles of Soka education are even more important nowadays than they ever have been.
Mm-hmm.
So can you say a little bit about the founding of Soka education and Tsunesaburo Makiguchi?
Yeah, sure. Well, the idea of Soka education, Soka meaning value, creating value creation, it's coming on to about 100 years since the ideas started percolating around in Tsunesaburo Makiguchi's mind. 2030 is actually the 100th anniversary of the official or founding of Soka education. 30 is what's known as the founding of the Soka Gakkai, Soka Value Creating Gakkai Society. It was basically a small group of educators that Makiguchi put together to discuss largely his ideas on value creating and his ideas on education, kind of mixed in with Buddhist philosophy. Makiguchi was always for the people. He had a very modest upbringing, lots of suffering himself. We won't go into that. People can look that up. But he was always a person for the people, and that continued as an educator. So he had developed these ideas of value creation, and in particular, his theory of value. So he kind of dabbled in different religions. He was born into a Hokkei family, like a Lotus Sutra family, and then he was raised in Zen, and he had friends and family that were Christians, and he practiced Shinto, but I would say dabbled, and because he never really caught on to religion as in a spiritual way. He always felt that religion was a platform for achieving value in one's daily life. So when he came upon Nichiren Buddhism, in particular the law of causality. Makiguchi, very much a scientist, believed in the scientific method, and so when he heard about the law of causality, that one thing leads to another, it piqued his interest. It aligned with his own ideas on value and value creation, which are basically, there are three ways that people can create value in their lives. One is through kind of sensory experiences. For example, you go to an art gallery, you see a nice painting, and it evokes emotion in you or pleasure. So anything that's sort of satisfying to you is kind of on the creating value under the rubric of beauty. He called that beauty. And then the other second value, and there's no chronological order to this, although one could be seen as creating more of a base of goodness than the other. But the second way of creating value in our lives is through what he called a gain or benefit, which is basically experiences that bring us individual material gain or some enhancement to our situation. The third leg of his theory of value is the creation of value for society. So contributing to the good of society. And so basically, in a very simple way, he said that we create value in our lives by those three aspects: beauty, gain, and good. And the ultimate value is if we can create experiences in our lives that incorporate all three. So that was his theory of value. And he had developed that well before he was converted into Buddhism. And it's just when he had heard lectures from a fellow educator whose name was Soka Mitani. He was a fellow educator. So Makiguchi attended lectures from him, and he introduced Makiguchi and the audience to Nichiren Buddhism, in particular the Risho Ankoko Run, which is the Japanese title for one of Nichiren's writings on establishing the correct teaching for securing the peace of the land. And Matani interpreted that as securing peace for people, not securing peace for the emperor or for the state, but for people. And Makiguchi liked that. That really fit again in with his ideas of creating value through our everyday interactions from the bottom up, from people.
If I could just say something about that writing, it is a pivotal writing because in that you see Nichiren Daishonin's commitment to creating a change in society that allows for the empowerment and flourishing of people and for a peaceful society.
Yeah.
And if you read the writing, the ultimate message is that what's needed is a change in thinking, a change in one's heart, and a spread of the understanding of the Lotus Sutra, which basically means that everybody has the potential to be a Buddha or to bring out their Buddhahood. That writing has many reasons why it's kind of revolutionary.
Yeah.
Because it was a dialogue. He didn't write it as a lecture. It was two people talking in this writing. He sent it to the most powerful person in Japan. And what he was outraged with was not other religions or other philosophies just because they were other religions or philosophies. Where he was directing his argument was against philosophies that disempowered people. So
Right.
I could see why Makiguchi, who was always committed to education for bringing out the uniqueness of each child, who was committed to the people, would read that writing and go, wow, here is a Buddhist teaching that is very squarely focused on creating peace in daily life,
Yeah.
right? And very clearly tackling philosophies and principles that are authoritarian in nature. So I can imagine that moment when he read that and thought, here is something that aligns with everything that I thought to be true. And so I just want to say a little bit about that writing and why it was
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah, that's really important. And also, he going back to the law of causality, the law of cause and effect, he saw that as kind of a platform for confirming his theory of value. So there's a theoretical side to Soka education, but the more important part of that is the practical side. How does Soka value creating education get practiced? How is it interpreted? How is it practiced in everyday society, in particular in schools? So Makiguchi and his protege Toda, who helped him to develop or expand on value creating education, they had this dream of actually opening up schools that were based on the theory of value. And that actually did not happen until Daisaku Ikeda, who was Toda's protege. He developed the first school in 1968, a Tokyo high school. And then Soka University in Japan was initiated in 1971. Now there's schools in 8 different countries, largely in Asia, although there is a university in California. So the idea of Soka education is that it is it's an educational practice or philosophy that's rooted in value creation. It emphasizes the whole person, so it's a holistic, humanistic type educational practice. It also emphasizes a commitment to lifelong learning and, importantly, making contributions to society.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you mentioned at the very start of the podcast about being fortunate to have a career that creates value. You know,
Mm-hmm.
when I was in school and dreaming of what my career would be, that was the last thing on my mind, to have a career that created value, right? Forget about that I knew nothing about value creation because I only was introduced to Soka when I was 30. So I had established a career. But who thinks about having a job that creates value? Most people think about having a job that you get some satisfaction, you earn some good coin. Those are important, right?
Yeah, of course. That's part of the gain, isn't it? Of the value
Yeah.
creation.
The gain, right? So very few people, and I'm not denigrating them, this is just the way things work. Very few people think about their job unless they're kind of raised in an environment, a humanistic environment themselves, or maybe their parents, or they have friends who volunteer and, they're involved with organizations that they care for others. But, most of us don't think about having a career that contributes to society. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is, to me, the beauty of Soka value creating, is that it incorporates 3 aspects that if we can fulfill in one way or another, help us to become better human beings: creating beauty, creating gain for ourselves, benefit for ourselves, but at the same time benefit for others, benefit for society. So what is Soka education? Well, in practice, it encourages students to create value in their lives regardless of the circumstance. We always think it's easier to create value when things are going good, but the challenge is, how do we create value when things are not going so good? And that kind of evokes one of my favorite Buddhist expressions in Japanese, Hindoku Yaku, which is changing poison into medicine.
Mm-hmm.
If we're faced with really challenging, adverse, suffering circumstances, what do we do when we're faced with that? Do we roll over in bed, cover our head, and hope it goes away? Or do we use that circumstance, that painful suffering, to create value in our life? So changing poison into medicine. Soka education is definitely a humanistic educational philosophy in the sense that it respects human dignity. It emphasizes that all people have this inner potential to grow, and it's just a matter of them discovering that potential and discovering the right platform to bring out that potential. Soka education, like the Soka Gakkai, is involved in peace, global peace, very interested in that, but not just interested in peace, but how we achieve peace, which is largely through dialogue and education,
Mm-hmm.
not peace through colonialism or military force or
Yeah. No.
imperialism, anything like that. It also is very much aligned with global citizenship. So it encourages its students to become global citizens, to think of others, to contribute positively to the world, to be compassionate with others, all the things that, this expression woke, that's gotten a bad name in certain countries around the world. Well, that's what global citizenship is. It's about being woke. So definitely Soka education promotes wokeness or global citizenship, and it's student-centered learning. So meaning that what's important in the Soka education relationship is the teacher-student relationship, where both are seen as reciprocally growing at the same time, not growing in the same ways, but it's not simply an educational philosophy or practice which is commonly practiced today, and always has been, which is this banking deposit idea that Paulo Freire talked about, where the role of teachers is to put ideas or knowledge into students' heads. That's their role. But Soka education does not believe that's the role of the educator. The role of the educator is, of course, to give knowledge or information to the students, but let them flourish in a way where they bring meaning to that knowledge and they realize their own potential by the meaning that they bring and by being creative with that knowledge. So those are all the things
Sorry,
about.
can I just add to that? Like, I just wanted to share. There's a beautiful quote that I remember the first time I heard about Makiguchi, and he was talking about rather than argue about different pedagogies and different educational theories, like what's superior and what's inferior, we should really look at the child that's standing in front of us
Yeah,
and think, what can I do to ensure that this child has has the happiest life?
yeah,
And so he was saying it's not about educational theory. Education needs to focus on how do I allow this student, this individual, to fulfill their potential and to lead a happy, creative life. But that's a part of the heart of Soka education is, as you
mhm,
said, student centered, people centered, with a confidence in their potential. And
yeah,
the other part of that, I've heard recently several videos where Daisaku Ikeda is talking about Makiguchi. And he was talking about how Makiguchi believed that all individuals are inherently creative. To be human is to be creative. And that if we are suppressing our creativity and not creating environments, whether in education or at home or work, where we can allow that creativity to flourish, then
mhm,
that it's going to be a problem. We're going to stagnate. We're not going to be happy. So in the words value create, there's that word create, because fundamentally he believed that we were all creative and that we could all create value. So yeah, so I just want to say that. And actually, in addition to that, I don't know if you're going to talk about the lecture that Daisaku Ikeda gave in Columbia University. You were saying that all your global citizenship students read this address. Just to add a quote from Daisaku Ikeda from that address that basically is speaking to what you just said. He says, teachers should come down from the throne where they are ensconced as the object of veneration to become public servants who offer guidance to those who seek to ascend the throne of learning. They should not be masters who offer themselves as paragons, but partners in the discovery of new models. He says, it is my abiding conviction that it is the teacher dedicated to serving students and not the inanimate facility that makes a school. So there's this idea that if a teacher isn't learning in the exchange with the students, they're missing an opportunity. There's this real like partnership education that happens in Soka education. Is that correct? Did I get it right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's where, and I have visited and observed a number of classrooms, so Soka education in practice, and I'm not saying that there are not teachers who are non-Soka affiliated that aren't great teachers. There are. There's no question about it. So
Of
there's
course.
nothing really tremendously unique about Soka education except for the teacher-student relationship. There are not too many teachers who really value this idea that their purpose in educating this student or the students they have is all geared towards their happiness. That is what
Mm-hmm.
Makiguchi said is the purpose of life, happiness. So it should be the purpose of education. One of the research studies that I did, we interviewed professors about their perspectives on teaching and tried to align it with Makiguchi's theory of value. And so we gave a little bit of a preamble and talked about the purpose of education being the happiness of the students. And this one very honest teacher who, in my opinion, was a very good teacher. I knew her. She said, I don't think about my students' happiness. That's not, she wasn't being nasty or mean. She
No.
just said, I never thought about that. That's the purpose of education
Huh?
is for students' happiness. They can be happy outside. They can do stuff outside of my classroom and be happy. So that to me is, when I observe teachers in the Soka education system and I see how they treat their students, they're not so concerned about, they have a curriculum, they have course material. They're not so concerned about covering all this material that I have in my syllabus for today. What they're more concerned about is feeding ideas and letting the students interact and exchange and dialogue with each other and creating value out of those ideas. And in particular, not just creating value in the classroom setting, but using that value in their daily life. That's what Makiguchi was most interested in, is how do we create value in our daily life through our interactions with other people. So just going back to the history of Soka education, so they had the Society of Teachers largely, and it never reached more than 500, and they pretty well discussed educational Makiguchi's theories and how it kind of aligned with Nichiren Buddhism. And then, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned about the persecution that he and Toda faced, and they were both thrown in prison, where Makiguchi passed away and Toda was released. And then Toda just basically built the Soka Gakkai into a lay peace movement for all people, not just educators. And that it grew in Japan. And then Ikeda took it international, where it's grown into this massive lay Buddhist movement with over 190 countries or territories with people practicing it. But there has always been this kind of separation between the secular and non-secular aspect of Soka. We practice Nichiren Buddhism within the Soka Gakkai, but then there's the educational stream, a formal educational stream, which is the more secular. And I've always been interested, since I've heard about Soka education, which is going on a couple of decades now, and especially how it ties into global citizenship, I've been interested in how that can be used as a platform to introduce people to Nichiren Buddhism. Not in an aggressively proselytizing way, but just in a sort of curiosity way, as an alternate way that we can educate young people and help them to achieve their greatest potential.
And for yourself, I know when you started practicing, you weren't exactly into the big spiritual aspects. I remember last time we were speaking, you were saying, well, I was an atheist and, of Jewish background, and you're still an atheist, but you're a Buddhist.
I'm a Jew-Bood atheist.
There we go.
There's such a thing.
So you want to say a little bit about how this dimension of secular and spiritual works together, and how that has kind of led you to really work within the realm of education, and specifically Soka education.
Yeah, sure. Well, so when I was introduced to Nichiren Buddhism, the Soka Gakkai, I think I already mentioned I was in a well-established job, but things were going south for me personally. And so I basically, out of desperation, because I really wanted nothing to do with any religion, but out of desperation, I just decided I would try this chanting thing. I have to say, it didn't make me feel better, really. It's not a meditative thing where it made me feel better. But, I started to get some personal benefits after, a couple of months. I wasn't going to meetings at that point. I wanted no part of a cultish community, or what I perceived as a cultish.
Thought.
So I thought, yeah. Later on, of course, I would achieve sort of leadership status within this cultish community.
The national leader for the young men.
Yeah.
In Canada.
But that's another story.
That's right.
But so for the first, I'd say 10 or 15 years of my practice, it was all about chanting, gaining personal benefit, trying to contribute in some way to making the world a more peaceful, harmonious way. I didn't know about Soka education, and very few members did. It wasn't really talked about that much, Soka education. It was really not in North America anyway, in Japan for sure. And so around 2010, I was going through some very, very difficult challenges at work. I was an executive director of a nonprofit counseling agency, and that was for like 20 years in that same agency. And I was just going through some tremendous.
Was it 20 years? I didn't realize it was 20 years.
Yeah, I was there for 20 years.
So even in your professional realm, it was dedicated to supporting the growth of young people. Right?
Yeah, well, always in my professional realm, it was in the nonprofit world. I was never interested in making money. And of course, you can't make money in the nonprofit world. It was more about me feeling good about helping people.
Yeah.
And that came from
kind of wealth.
It is, yeah, for sure. It's the wealth that I prefer.
Hmm.
Don't get me wrong, you need money to survive. So yeah, I was going through some heavy duty challenges at that time, and at the same time I was kind of getting maybe burnt out in the nonprofit world. I'd been at it for like already 20 years. Dabbled a little bit in teaching part time in the community college sector. And so in 2010, in May, I was fortunate to be one of the SGI Canada representatives when Laval University presented an honorary degree to Daisaku Ikeda in Japan. And so I was there, I witnessed that. I heard President Ikeda's powerful speech where he talked a lot about the value of education. And I thought, yeah, I'm not going to go back to nonprofit. Well, certainly not what I've been doing in the nonprofit sector. I'm not going to go into the business sector, but I'm going to do something. I'm going to create value in my life, as you said.
Hmm.
I'm going to find a job where I can feel good about contributing to society in an educational way. And it was May, so 4 months later, I got this amazing job at this university, which really, I didn't have a PhD at the time. So, and this was the head of an academic program. So it was very unique that I was offered this position under my circumstances. It was probably, well, I know it was because of my skills as an executive in the nonprofit sector, because it was in family and community social services. So this was just an amazing turnaround for me. And I didn't know at the time how I would be able to create value in this job. But piece by piece, things started to happen where I found out that as the academic head of this program, I was responsible for nominating people to receive honorary degrees um, through University of Guelph, because our affiliation was with the University of Guelph. And so I did. I put a nomination forward for President Ikeda for an honorary degree, and he was awarded an honorary degree in 2012. And I traveled to Japan with the president of University of Guelph to bestow that degree on Daisaku Ikeda. And at the same time, I started to network with people at Soka University because that's where the ceremony was. And I started to talk with the dean of the Faculty of Education and some faculty about developing a study abroad program where I would introduce students to Soka education and bring them to Japan and bring them to Soka University to learn about Soka education. And so that was put into the process. And so through the course of my career, I think I did 8 study abroads to
Wow.
Japan, introducing students to Soka education, and then at the same time started to negotiate an exchange agreement between my university and Soka University, where students from Soka University could study at my university, and students from my university could study at Soka University. Brought over some faculty from Soka University to teach at Guelph Humber on a visiting professor basis. I was invited to teach at Soka University a few years ago on a visiting professor basis, and then the research center that I developed. So, when I took this job, I had no idea that I was going to be able to use the job as a way to create value and to introduce people to Soka education, value creating education, and the Soka Gakkai for sure.
Hmm.
So, this has been sort of a phenomenal, we say good fortune, blessing, whatever, but this is how you can change poison into medicine. 2010, a very poisonous environment for me, and I just was able to turn that around and create some very significant value for myself and for others. And at the same time, it's helped me to learn a lot about Soka education. It's helped me to develop an expertise in it, as well as in a parallel way, an expertise in global citizenship.
I remember speaking to you in the maybe first 5 years or so that you were there. Correct me if I'm wrong. I remember you had like a list of goals when you got the job, and one of them was an honorary doctorate. One of them was this, Soka exchange, all of those things. And I remember at the time you being surprised at how quickly it all happened. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in Canada, it took decades before Daisaku Ikeda got any kind of an honorary doctorate. He has over 400 honorary doctorates from various universities. And in Canada, it wasn't until 2010 that that actually happened at
Yeah.
Laval. And then you come along within 2 years. There's the second one, and everything unfolded relatively quickly. And I would say, maybe you can't say that, but I would say, that is a real reflection of determination. Like, I don't know
Mhm.
what happened to you at that lecture in 2010 in that room, but based on my own experiences and that of many other Buddhists, there is something incredible that can happen in these moments of when there is a lot of poison, and then you make this phenomenal, profound determination and you align that determination with creating value. Then it's like, look out, look what can happen. So to
Yeah.
me, everything that's happened to you is really a reflection of your life, your sincerity, because this doesn't happen without a very sincere heart and
Mhm.
character and all of that. So like I have nothing but congratulations and respect and admiration for everything you've been able to achieve, because I think it's a reflection both of your faith, your competence, all the, you can't do this kind of stuff without the internal being solid. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's just incredible. Now, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about what has been the response from students. Like, how did they respond to this idea of global citizenship, especially in the current climate? And like, what have been some of the highlights, like when they go to Japan,
Yeah.
and what happens, like when they go into the class? What are the reflections after that exchange program?
Yeah. Let me just, before I get into that, I just want to comment on what you said about how much I've been able to accomplish. And thank you for those kind words. The background to that is when I was chanting in that period of 2010 to get a job in education, there's this idea about how can we, through our chanting, quickly and productively get what we want, basically, to put it in a crude way. And I've been told, and the first time I was told this was from our former chairperson, Mrs. Elizabeth Azumi, when I had approached her about an issue, and I said, it's not happening quickly enough for me. I'm doing lots of chanting and it's not happening. She said, well, if you tie your chanting into your mission for Kozen Rufu, your mission for peace, then things will happen quicker. So that's how I actually chanted. To the uninitiated, they might say, what do you mean by that? So basically, it's like I had this idea in mind um, all the time, not just when I'm chanting, but all the time, that the next job I'm going to get, I want to be able somehow for to be a platform for me to show my potential in contributing to world peace.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of a thing. And I think that was a key for me to land a job that, unbeknownst to me at the time, but as it developed, I was able to do things through my job and through the support of certainly the support of my boss, there's no question about that, to do these things that I could create value, contribute in some way to global peace and harmonious existence between people. I don't know the effect of it. You can't measure those sorts of things. But I do know that through all of these efforts, I've been able to introduce many hundreds of people to the idea of value creating education, and who knows what will happen when you plant a seed. So
Mm-hmm.
you asked about student response. Well, most of the students that I teach global citizenship to or take on study abroad, or my research assistants through my research center that I eventually take to Japan as well to meet with the students that they're working with virtually. We go to Japan in February to meet with them in person. They have no idea about Soka education, not a clue. And probably the same about global citizenship, unless they have had an interest before. And I know this because when I interview them, they have to apply for these things. I ask them, what do you know about Soka education? What do you know about global citizenship? Not very much. But they're interested enough in these things through my explanation to say, yeah, I'm really interested in learning how to be a better person, learning how to treat people better, learning how to develop my life in a contributive way. They are, little do they know, but they're in for the experience of their lives. Now, my most recent cohort of research assistants that I've just recruited, and now we've started our next project. Last year's cohort they're all posting. So I put something on LinkedIn about my new cohort, and then my former students are posting, "You're so lucky. It's an amazing transformational experience. You're going to love it," and all this kind of thing. So students who have experienced the Soka environment, largely by meeting Soka educated students at the high school or the university or sitting in the classrooms, just the way they're treated, and it's a very different environment for them. To a student, they come out saying, "I want to take this back to where I live. I want to live like this. I want to treat my family and friends the way that I've been treated here." Now, some of that, of course, is Japanese culture. There's no question about it. It's not
Yes.
all purely Soka. But Soka is, if you can think of the stereotypical Japanese culture being very considerate and non-confrontative, Soka is that, this uber, that is like, it's exponentially developed that way. Um, yeah, the students all um, they just glow, especially the ones that I take to Japan. They talk about how they want to use this not necessarily the practice of Buddhism. Very few of the students that I've introduced have actually wanted to chant. I don't talk to them about that. They approach
Yeah, it's
me
not part.
about
It's
it.
not part of the program.
No, but some of them have approached me, and I've said, if you're interested, I can introduce you to some people here if you're interested in learning about Buddhism. And some of them have, but most of them say, "I want to use the idea of Soka education, the values that are instilled in it, in my career." And these are students who are going to have careers in education, ecology, business. You might think
Social work,
social
right?
work, yeah. You might think business. How can somebody use value creation in business? It's business is cutthroat, and all that kind of thing. But definitely is a
There
way.
is. And there's a guy named Adam Grant. He's
Yeah.
a researcher and, thought leader. All of his all of his material that is guiding, or even Simon Sinek, for example, right? Those
Hmm.
are all people that are influencing corporations, talking about corporate philosophy,
Yeah.
and it's all very Soka education, to be perfectly honest. They talk
Yeah.
about servant leadership. They
Yeah.
talk about creating contributive environments. If you read anything from Adam Grant, it is unbelievable how in line it is with all of these principles that we have been studying and practicing for the past 40 years. So it
Yeah.
is out there, even in the corporate environment.
Well, yeah, and I've seen it definitely. So it's helped me certainly to change my perspective on business. The other thing that they're blown away by, you mentioned Ikeda's speech at Columbia, thoughts
Yes.
on education for global citizenship, and within that, I mean, that's required reading for all SOCA students, and it's actually required reading for all of my students because within that essay, he talks about the three virtues of wisdom, courage, and compassion, and he translate those are all three um, virtues of a bodhisattva.
And of Buddhahood. When we talk about Buddhahood and enlightened nature,
Yeah,
it's not an esoteric life condition. It simply
right,
means wisdom, courage, compassion, and life
right.
force
Yeah, but
manifesting,
so
right?
he extrapolates those three virtues into a global citizenship ethic. So the wisdom to recognize the interconnectedness of all things. So we're all connected,
Oh,
but you need to have wisdom, not knowledge,
that's
wisdom.
right.
Okay, we can learn that, but and that's the knowledge. But how do you translate that into the wisdom? Means that you take that knowledge and you act on that in terms of how you treat other people, and then the courage to not be afraid of diversity, but to embrace it. It does take courage, and then the compassion to imagine the suffering of people who you don't know and to want them to be relieved of their suffering. So these are three things. These are very unfamiliar ideas to most people, but certainly to young people who have not studied that sort of thing before. And they're all really taken aback by that. And they're kind of thinking, yeah, that's an interesting way to view life, to
Hmm.
treat people that way. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm most happy about is the experience of the students, that they use their activities either on study abroad. Now I'm only doing the research center activities, but for the students to come to this realization that there's more to life or more to a job than just, or more to education than just securing a job. It's more about how am I going to live my life to the highest virtue and treat others the same.
Yeah, and I mean that's an incredible thing to give a young person,
Mm-hmm.
right? To give like foundational philosophical principles of how to live in this world. That's an amazing gift to be exposed to when you're young. And I was just thinking while you were speaking how there's so many courses I took in university that I thought I'm never going to use this in real life. Like I just can't wait till this course ends. Final exam, we are done. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to hear about the statistics of economics ever again as long as I live or whatever the course was, right? It's not the natural experience of so many courses that you take in university, even if they're relevant to your job, even like a marketing course or whatever. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many things, so many courses that you take in university that are requirements. And you know that the minute you graduate, you're not going to really use them
Statistics
or go back to
101.
them. Pardon?
Statistics 101
Yeah, exactly. Right.
was the most dreaded and feared course in undergraduate university.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I did second year part of a BCom, Echo 220. Still have trauma in my bones.
Right.
But what you're doing is the opposite, right? They're taking a course that they can already envision the value and the impact it's going to have in their lives and in their careers. Like that's an incredible experience to
Mm-hmm.
give a young person and to be a part of as a youthful person. You might not be youth, but you're youthful, right?
Yeah.
And to enjoy in that shared growth because I'm assuming, that when they grow, there's an aspect of you that that experiences that growth and grows as well. It's that shared education model where
Yeah.
it's not the teacher talking down to the student, right?
Right.
It's shared education.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, to that point, I've been running the research center for 8 years now. And the first 3 or 4 years, we basically did research studies. So we looked at how students and teachers perceive experiential learning and translated that through the lens of Makiguchi's theory of value. We interviewed SGI Canada members who were teachers in terms of how they perceive Soka education. We did what was called a meta synthesis. We scoured the academic literature on global citizenship and compared that what scholars are saying about global citizenship to how Daisaku Ikeda envisions global citizenship. And these are all published. I was very fortunate to get all these published in peer-reviewed journals. And those are good. I mean, they're important. People who read them learn about Soka and global citizenship. But lately, what I've been doing with my research students is they've been learning about nuclear disarmament, which
Mm.
goes way back to Toda's days, the the declaration against nuclear arms that he made, which basically was the foundation of the Soka Gakkai's peace movement. And
Mhm.
so I've been doing that now for about this is the fourth year where they purely study nuclear disarmament. And this is again, Canada is we're a peaceful country anyway. We've never had involvement with nuclear arms or anything like that. We're pretty protected peoples. And so we don't really study about the evils of nuclear war and nuclear arms. And this again is a sort of a mind-blowing experience for my students when they learn about these things. I take them after we've done research projects on nuclear disarmament. Part of their field trip in February when I take them to Japan is we visit Hiroshima. We visit the Peace Memorial Museum, the grounds there. They take it all in. We visit the SGI International Center in Hiroshima, where the students have an experience from Hibakusha, a bomb survivor. Very profound. I mean, these are people that were there when the bomb exploded, and this is their experience. And it really leaves a lasting impression on students about the evils of nuclear arms. And so I really feel this is very important for my students to learn about this. And they've all developed projects on what they've learned about nuclear. Like one of the students talked about how they always thought it was good to have nuclear arms as a deterrent kind of a thing, but they learned that that's
Wow.
not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
That maybe deterrence is not the way to go. Maybe it's just abolishing all potential platforms for destroying the world. So yeah, that's been another aspect of the research that the students are doing. They're learning things that they don't know, they haven't learned yet, and they normally wouldn't learn in their university courses, unless perhaps they took an elective course and it dealt with that. But I can't think of too many, not at the university that I was at, that had an elective course on those sorts of things.
And you have something exciting coming up in that realm, right? In Winnipeg, the conference that people are
Yeah,
attending?
yeah. There's a group in Winnipeg that puts on an annual Youth Nuclear Peace Summit.
Hmm.
We were invited last year as the first university. It's usually for high schools. And these are high schools where they have a course on nuclear disarmament, or it's part of their curriculum. And it's both Canada and the States. And it takes place at the Winnipeg Museum for Human Rights. Phenomenal place.
Wow.
So we were invited last year as the first university to present our projects, and they've invited us back this year. And I believe they're inviting other universities as well because they want to expand it beyond high school. So another opportunity for students to network with one another around this very important issue. Last year, we have also, through my research center, we have a special annual lecture that's given by experts on either or both of Soka education and global citizenship. Last year, we had Dr. Ira Helfand, who's a co-founder of the Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. He gave
Mm-hmm.
a great presentation on nuclear disarmament, what we can do to prevent nuclear war, that sort of thing. He's actually going to be at the Winnipeg conference this year as well, so that'll be great
And
for my.
just and just so everybody knows, that's so no November 18th, you always have that lecture and
Yeah,
anybody can sign up online and attend. So it's something
correct.
to look forward to on November 18th. And speaking of November 18th, I just want to highlight this is kind of this is strange in a way because I've been practicing a very long time. Well, 40 years, whatever, long enough. And we were always told that November 18th was the founding day of the Soka Gakkai, right? So it's normally you think, oh yeah, November 18th. And it wasn't until the last 5 years or so that the penny dropped. And the founding of the Soka Gakkai was actually the publishing of Makiguchi's theory of value creation.
Yeah,
So the founding of the Soka Gakkai is based on the declaration of an idea. It wasn't a board meeting. It wasn't a meeting with a bunch of people in it. It wasn't people signing off on documents and saying, now we founded an organization. The founding of the Soka Gakkai comes from the publishing date of that theory. In a way, I always think of it as like it is the declaration of this idea globally now, right?
yeah,
And
that's
there's
right.
right, and there's something.
They actually didn't have their first annual meeting until 1937, I think. So 7 years after it was, and I think what happened is that they just went back in history and they figured, okay, when can we say was the founding? And they okay, well, we'll tie it into the volume one of Makiguchi's theory of value, and the publishing date was November 18th,
Yeah,
1930.
1930. And it was also something that Toda, right, the second president, helped happen, right? Because he was a publisher, and
That's
he's
right.
the one that worked with Makiguchi
Yeah.
to make this happen. To me, there's layers of meaning and inspiration in that, that the fact that again, everything starts with a declaration of an idea,
Hmm.
and a theory for value creation and a commitment to improving humanity ultimately, right? So, yeah, so November 18th is the day of the annual lecture that your research center hosts. So anybody can have access to that.
It's around that day, I think,
Okay.
and that's Eastern Standard Time. And I believe this year's lecture is November 18th. And it's been given by an expert in global citizenship he's an American, but he's been teaching in Seoul, Korea at the university there. His name is Dr. Hans Schattel.
Great.
I've studied him. I've cited him many times. So when I connected with him, he was just so pleased and happy to do it. He knows a little bit about the Soka Gakkai. And this is going to be great. He's going to talk actually about not just about global citizenship, but more so about the growing trend of authoritarianism and nationalism, and
Mm.
how it's so important for us to keep on talking about global citizenship, and how global citizenship can combat this growing tide of nationalistic retreat, I suppose, if we want to put it that way. So
Yeah. No, it's more important than ever. I had a podcast with Joe Parks in Washington, D.C., and
Mm-hmm.
we were talking about, what Kozenrufu actually means. And we're talking about this idea of having a peaceful world based on individuals becoming happier. And we're talking about the elements of it. And he just stopped me and he just said, all those things are under attack right now. Like we talk about these things as they're obvious. Like, of course, global citizenship is a great idea. Of course, a flourishing of culture and peace is a great idea. And he was saying, no, that stuff is under attack right now. He said the Institute of Peace
Mm-hmm.
was shut down. And he said it's a privately funded institution.
Oh, is it in the States?
Yeah,
Yeah,
in
right.
Washington. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
there's a direct attack on some of these principles happening out there in society. So I think it's a time for us to be even stronger in those realms and hold fast to those principles because it is the light in the darkness, And before we kind of took all these things for granted, isn't that kind of how you want to live based on these principles? And it's like, no, there's a lot of division, there's a
No,
lot of
not
confusion.
necessarily. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's not just recent. Back in 1997, whenever, maybe it was, that's too early, whenever Theresa May was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, I can't remember
Hmm.
when that was, but it was
I don't
over,
know.
it was at least 10, 15 years ago. She actually gave a speech where she said, if you think you're a global citizen, then you're not a citizen at all.
Wow.
I'm paraphrasing, but basically
Yeah.
she was denigrating the whole idea of global citizenship. So
Yeah.
it is a very controversial topic for sure, because some people believe that if you espouse the values of a global citizen, which are really cosmopolitan values, then you're
Yeah.
betraying your own country, then you're not a patriot. They don't
Yeah.
quite get that you can love your country, but you can also love people from other countries as well, or care enough about them that you value everybody.
Exactly. And I think it's a perspective of yourself that is multidimensional, right?
Yeah.
There's a quote from Václav Havel, who was the former leader of the Czech Republic, and he was part of the Velvet Revolution. And I remember reading the first part of his book. I never actually finished it. And he was talking about after, the fall of the Iron Curtain and how what was happening was this intense nationalism and it was causing all kinds of problems. And he said, really, we should look at our nationalism as like one side of a coin. So rather than I am this nationality, it's rather one should look at it as one dimension of who you are. It's like I am this and I'm that and I'm this, maybe not two, multidimensional. So if we look at our if we look at our cultural background and our nationalism as one dimension of who we are. And we can be proud of that and we can celebrate it and all of that. It's healthy. But if we look at it as the only like our core identity is I
Mm.
am this kind of nationalist, that's when there's problems, right? And so the idea of global citizenship allows me to be Croatian background, Croatian culture originally, Canadian, really, because I grew up here and at the same time part of the world community. So I've always considered myself a global citizen. That's
Hmm.
always been a concept that's resonated for me. Next, I'd like to ask you, what do you see as the major challenges in education right now, or one of them?
The major challenge is the funding. Um, and this is just this is global, not just the funding, but there seems to be a movement globally, certainly in more countries than others, that higher education is not to be valued. It just produces elites who think that they're better than everybody else, and this has to do with that the people who have studied for a long time at university and done research for the good of humanity, for some reason their credibility is being put in doubt, and we won't go into the psychology of that. But that is becoming a problem, that the value of higher education is is being eroded. And one of the reasons that's not good, I mean, it's not good at all, because it's certainly from the fortresses of universities, we've had some amazing people, and amazing discoveries. Uh, but one of the bigger problems is that over the last certainly 10 years, there's been this phenomenal growth in university enrollment of women. Whereas before, universities were only seen as the purview of men, even in the 60s and 70s. So we're seeing universities and colleges attract young women in droves. And if there's going to be a problem with the funding of universities, that's going to be a problem for young women, but well, for all young people. So, and this could have been predicted. I mean, as I mentioned, I worked in the nonprofit field. So in the mid '90s in Ontario, there was a significant loss of funding in the nonprofit world, thanks to conservative government ideas about funding services for the poor or the vulnerable. And that forced nonprofits to close. There was a significant loss of services. Mergers had to happen. And then it happened in the health field. Same thing. We saw mergers of hospitals. Largely it's because expenses just keep going up and up and up in these institutions, and it's hard to fund them. So this is across Canada, where the Canadian government put a stop to the enrollment of international students, which was providing a lot of financial support through their tuition to universities. And so we're going through the crunch now in terms of we're seeing a lot of colleges and universities suspend a lot of their programs that were reliant on international student support. We could see closures, mergers, things like that.
And what about AI?
Yeah, well, AI is one of those things. When I first heard about AI, of course, I was threatened in the sense that I'm already worried about plagiarism and students buying their papers, which happens, of course. And now we have AI where you're going to just punch in the topic of an essay and you're going to have, a full essay provided for you that is very, very difficult to decipher if it was done by the student or by some robot somewhere. But I'm starting to think that that's not going to go away. You can't fight it.
No.
And I don't mean if you can't fight it, join it. I think we need to do is think about the role of education and how we assess students, the kinds of assignments we give them, so that they are using more of their own creative juices and not relying on somebody or something else to develop their ideas. And so that it's going to change. It already is, but I think the way that we provide assignments to students to test their knowledge is going to definitely change because of AI.
And you mentioned a really good example the other day when we were speaking that you did in one class where you gave them the material to research independently at home. And then when they
Yeah.
came into the class, they had to formulate arguments. I thought that was an interesting solution. Whereas if they just had to hand in a paper or hand in an argument on their own, that would have been a different exercise. But when they were asked to read the material and then come in with arguments referencing that material,
Yeah.
and as I understand, it ended up being a kind of an exciting, invigorating process for them, right?
Yeah. Well,
Because
that's when
the light bulbs go off.
right. That's when I have students do debates on
Mm-hmm.
social issues, social,
Yeah.
political. And so they do the research on their own time. And yeah, if they want to, type into their keyboard or their phone, tell me everything I need to know about nuclear arms, or give me 3 pros and cons for banning voting, or something like that.
Mm.
But they still have to come to the classroom and use that information real time to debate somebody else on those issues. Someone takes the pro, someone takes the con. And so they're learning about the perspectives from both sides. And so they're not simply churning out an assignment and handing it in and waiting for their grade and then being disappointed with their grade and then complaining to their professor about the grade they got. And that song and dance. So yeah, I think a lot more of that stuff needs to happen where students are doing critical thinking and learning about the perspectives of others, because that's really what university is supposed to be for.
Yeah. And that's the opportunity, right? Is
Yeah.
all of a sudden the old ways of teaching and doing assignments is not necessarily going to fly. And what you just said in this new model, so you're going to have students that now can develop greater critical thinking and be able to understand the perspective of others.
Yeah.
And if that's the outcome, then that's a pretty great outcome, right? It's
Yeah.
if there's a redirection in education. So my last question for today is, what advice would you like to give young people these days?
It's funny, whenever in my younger days, whenever I'd hear somebody say to somebody, what advice would you like to give to young people? That was always really an old person. So now that you're asking me that, that puts me in that container that I'm an old person. But
Well, if
what,
yeah,
and
sorry, Paul. If it makes you feel any better, it's what Daisaku Ikeda often asked in
yeah,
his
yeah,
dialogues, whether he was talking to somebody young or somebody old. He was always asking for, what advice do you want to give young people? Because young people and the next generation is where his heart was focused, right? So
sure.
don't
Yeah.
worry. Don't
No,
take it
I'm
badly.
just kidding.
Yeah.
The advice I would give, um, and it really is the motto of the Soka Gakkai, which is never give up. But it's like I would say never, 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 ever give up. And I say that out of my own experience, but also, when we're in the thick of a problem of real suffering, we just can't see a way out of it. And there's so many metaphors that you can think about. And Kata talked about this a lot. We brought the metaphor of, even on a very cloudy day, the sun is always shining up there. But it's true. If you give up, you'll never resolve your problem. So don't give up, regardless of what's happening, and regardless of how long it takes. But also, in the process of not giving up, try to see this as a way to create value in your life. It's not like you've heard the expression, it's the journey, not the destination.
Mm-hmm.
So, by not giving up and fighting through your challenges, you're going to achieve the destination that you want, but you're also going to relish that journey. And it's the journey that's going to be the evidence for you to continue fighting obstacles whenever they come up. So that's what I would give.
And the beauty of that is when we talk about winning or losing, like everyone's so conscious of like win, 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 win. But from that perspective, winning is just not giving up. If you
Yeah,
haven't given up, you've won. That's the beauty of that, right? You don't have to feel that, put this pressure. It's like, oh, I have to have won something or achieved something. When you're in the thick of it, as long as you haven't given up, you've won. That is the
yeah,
win from a Buddhist perspective, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just making a note here because, like if we can treat our life like almost as Makiguchi did from a scientific point of view, that our life is an experiment.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you when we were talking before, like the very famous discussion meetings of the Soka Gakkai, which I'm sure you've talked about in other podcasts, or you will. Though in the early days, when Makiguchi first developed those, he called them discussion meetings for experimentally confirming the life of greatest good. And so basically the meetings were people coming in who were practicing Nichiren Buddhism and standing up or kneeling, whatever they did, sitting, and basically gave their testimonial. And this was about how they used their practice to create gain in their life or create good in society. And to Makiguchi, this was a scientific experiment to confirm the validity of Nichiren Buddhism when he had people, when ordinary people came in and said, yeah, I chanted and I chanted and I had this suffering and I continued to chant and I got this great result. And so if we can see our lives the same way, treat our lives as sort of an experiment in life. How can we make our lives to be of great value to ourselves and to society?
Mm-hmm. I just want to show a couple of books, and I'll put it in the description below. That if you're interested in Soka education or some of these discussions, there's a couple of books that you can get. There's one called Soka Education for the happiness of the individual. There's a really beautiful one called The Light of Learning, Daisaku Ikeda, Selected Writings on Education. If you are in America, there is this little book that came out recently called A New Way Forward. It has all the lectures that Ikeda did at American universities, and it includes the Columbia lecture that Paul was referring to. That's a key reading for the program. And the last one that came out a few years ago is Hope and Joy in Education. And this one's pretty phenomenal too. They're all great. But this one actually has different authors writing on Daisaku Ikeda's essays on education. And there's a huge diversity of people who have contributed to this book. And just the idea of hope and joy in education can be revolutionary these days as a basis for one's career. However, even if you're not an educator, as a human, as a Buddhist, it's always a really good idea to kind of think about how can I bring hope and joy into my work.
I neglected to mention, and you can edit this in or not, is sort of the bookend to all of my activities at Guelph Humber was when I was asked to be to have a cross appointment at Soka University to teach there in the fall of 2023. I was actually asked before COVID, but then COVID. So around 2019, I was asked if I would come and teach there for a semester. And I thought, man, this unbelievable, like a really nice bookend to teach at this wonderful campus. And so it was put off because of COVID until fall 2023. So I taught my global citizenship course there. And so I felt like I was a real Soka educator. And when I got there, about a week after I arrived, after dealing with jet lag, I wrote a little note to President Ikeda to say, "Hey, I'm here, and I'm here at the university. I'm teaching a course, and um, I think like he knew about me because of all the work I've been doing. I was covered by the Seikyo Shinbun, the Japanese Gakkai newspaper." But I didn't, didn't expect a response. About 5 weeks before he passed away, I get this note from him. Would you mind if I read it? Because to me, this is my most
Please,
cherished.
please,
I mean,
yeah.
I talked about how nominating President Ikeda for an honorary degree from University of Guelph was a highlight for me. This is the bookend to it. So September 25th, 2023, I get a email from the SGI office with President Ikeda's response to my letter to him. So this is September 25th, 2023. He died November 17th. So, 5, 6 weeks later, he says, Dear Dr. Paul Sherman, thank you very much for your kind letter. I was delighted to know that you are well and continuing your great endeavor for the promotion of Soka education. As the founder, I would like to extend my gratitude for all that you have done and will do for the students of Soka University and Soka schools. Kaneko joins me in my prayers for your most fruitful and pleasant stay in Japan. With my best wishes, Daisaku Ikeda. So to me, not only was this a deeply personal letter from him, because it was different from the usual one-liners, but he is acknowledging, and not that I needed him to acknowledge, I wasn't looking for that, but that he's acknowledging this mission that I have sort of created to do whatever I can do in my own capacity to promote value creating education. So I just thought, that's it. I don't need anything else just to receive this. So this sits on my altar in a frame that I can refer to, and especially since he passed away. He passed away 2 days after I got back from Japan. So that's a real memory for me.
It's amazing. Well, congratulations, but I think, I'm so honored to have this chance to talk to you. And I am just in awe with everything that you have done and the immense value that you've created that began with, a simple prayer and determination.
Mm.
I'm going to do something in education. And yeah, it's just such an incredibly inspiring story. Well, I thank you as a human being. I thank you as a Buddhist. I thank you as a world citizen. I thank you so much for every effort you made because it can sound really exciting and glamorous in a way when you recite somebody's accomplishments, right? I've done this, I've done that, and it looks all good and all incredible. But the reality is, as we know, I can't imagine the challenges that you would have had going through that whole process and the exertion of energy and determination that it required to keep going and to keep those goals central, and you were able to do all of it. So I'm just so grateful to have this time and for everything that you did, like to be able to create this and inspire so many people is just an amazing feat.
But the trick for me um, was, yeah, I did go through some challenges and adversity trying to do all this stuff. But the trick for me was when facing the adversity and trying to create hope and joy even out of adversity.
Yeah.
Because if you don't look at adversity that way, then you just shut it right down, and there's no chance. So
Yeah.
this never give up attitude is just so that the is forms the spirit of the Soka Gakkai. Just
Mm.
as President Ikeda often said, the only failure is giving up.
That's right.
And I often tell my students that, like when they tell me, they've used me as a reference for graduate school, and they say I didn't get in, and I said, don't give up. You know,
Yeah.
there's, you didn't get it now, but don't, if that's your dream, then don't give up. So
Yeah.
I think that's may have been what I said on my retirement video as well. But I really truly believe that is, um, it's easy to give up. Um,
Yeah.
what's that? What did Nichiren say in the Go Show? To
He
start
said
is,
why he said when there's like when the all big obstacle comes, the wise will rejoice and the
and the
foolish will
foolish will
retreat.
retreat. Yeah, but he also said it's easy to start. It's difficult to continue.
That's right. Yeah. He
Yeah,
talked about specifically about faith, right? It's
yeah,
easy to accept these principles
that's right.
and go, "Oh yeah, that sounds good. I'm going to change my destiny or I'm going to get benefits." It's easy to accept but very difficult to continue.
Yeah,
So congratulations to both of us for continuing,
yes.
right? And never giving up and getting to celebrate in this moment together. So I'm going to close with that. And again, thank you so much, Paul.
Thank
And
you.
I hope everyone's enjoyed this discussion. I think it's a rare chance for a lot of people to hear about Soka education, particularly the advancements you've made in Canada. This has been amazing. So have a great remainder of the day and the months ahead. And we'll see everybody next time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.